What's up YouTube? Today we're having a look at the Dell Inspiron 16 Plus. I find this to be a very interesting machine, and to be honest, I was pretty excited to review it. On one side, this is a traditional productivity based laptop, part of Dell's Inspiron series. On the other side, you can consider this to be a moderately capable gaming machine. So you can get this in the base configuration with just mere Intel UHD graphics, or you can spec it all the way up to a RTX 3060 in the top configuration and range between an i5 or an i7. With that said, the configuration we have here today is kind of the middle line or the most popular choice. So this guy right here has the i7-11800H processor, 16 gigabytes of RAM. We also have a 512 GB solid state drive. Of course, we have the RTX 3050 with 4 gigabytes of VRAM. It's worth noting we do have the latest Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth standards on board. And finally, this is a 16-inch 3K display. More on that later on though. Of course, the objective of this review, as always, is to see whether or not this laptop excels at what it's trying to do, or if it's going to fail in both the category of productivity and moderate gaming. As always, if you enjoyed the review, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel. I promise you got awesome content. I'm always doing my best to produce more for you guys. Starting off with a real quick unboxing, you can see that the Inspiron 16 Plus comes in some pretty standard looking cardboard packaging that you find in most of Dell's Inspiron series. Of course, once you proceed to remove the actual content seal on the top of the box opens up in a pretty traditional manner, and inside the first item you have, of course, is the 16 Plus itself in a ton of protective packaging. Once you remove all of that, here it is in all its glory. Looks nice, it looks big, but more on that in a minute. You also have a 130 watt charging adapter, and despite looking so large, it actually feels lighter than a lot of 60 watt adapters. Not in a cheap way, just rather interesting way. You do have a proprietary pin, so no USB-C out of the box, but given the high wattage, that is acceptable. Beyond that, you also of course have the wall outlet piece to plug in to any given wall outlet. And finally, you have the quick start guide, warranty information, regulation, compliance stuff, the stuff you're never going to read. From a design point of view, the Inspiron 16 Plus looks very familiar to the rest of the Inspiron series with some minor additions, which I'll talk about briefly. It is a high quality laptop that uses a nice mix of standard and premium materials. With that said, this laptop does have an overall weight of 4.4 pounds, making it heavier than even some gaming machines. It is a 16-inch laptop, but keep in mind this is not designed for portability or all-day carry around. Starting off with the top side, you have a nice premium metallic finish, no particular texture but smooth to the touch. And of course, in the dead center, you have that iconic Dell logo with that nice mirror-like reflective surface. Overall, I like the minimalist approach here. Making our way to the rear side of the laptop, of course you have the hinge brackets, but the most interesting thing here is that unique circular hole punch style exhaust vent that you have going on here. I haven't seen this before in any other Inspiron laptop, and it's definitely unique to this laptop, at least at the time of this video. Cool design choice. Now, as you make your way to the side of the machine, you have a DC port to, of course, charge the laptop itself, an additional exhaust vent. Beyond that, you have a HDMI port, a USB 3 port, and a Thunderbolt 4 port. As you make your way to the other side, of course, you'll notice again, you have another exhaust vent, making a total of 4, plenty of cooling going on. Beyond that, you have a full-sized SD card reader, one more USB 3.0 port, and finally, the good old headphone jack. Making our way to the bottom side of the laptop, you'll notice all the air intake vents you have over here, which makes total sense since technically you do have a dual fan setup here, one for the discrete GPU and one for the CPU itself. Apart from that, this is a hard TPU finish at the bottom, and you do have a couple rubber grips, not much else to see over here. Upon unfolding this device, the first thing you notice is the humongous amount of palm rest space you have. You can comfortably rest your wrist over here. Also, it's worth noting the entire inner chassis is made of a metallic finish. Again, nice and premium. Now, what's even more cool is that humongous trackpad you have over here. This is probably the largest trackpad I've seen on a Dell device or Dell laptop, to be more specific. Also, it's worth noting you do have an ample amount of surface space. It is relatively well calibrated. Unfortunately, Dell opted to use a plastic finish as opposed to a glass surface finish, and turns out when you use plastic on such a large surface area, you get a fair bit of flex on the corners, as is the case over here. This is kind of sad because it really does take away from the really cool look of this trackpad. Unlike the trackpad, the keyboard not only looks nice, it feels really premium and nice as well. So you have nice and spacious keycaps that are very sturdy, but you also have a ample amount of key travel and every keystroke feels nice and tactile. This is a very enjoyable typing experience. Furthermore, of course, this is a fully backlit keyboard with a 2-tier lighting system. You have a full-size 10-key number pad for you productivity users out there. It's also worth noting that the actual power button doubles as a fingerprint scanner, so you do have biometric recognition on board. Above the keyboard itself, you have the actual speaker grill, which goes from one end to the other, and we will be doing a sound test later on in the video to see how the stereo speaker stacks up. If you watched any of my reviews before, you know how much of a Hitler I am for hinge quality. And with that said, I'm happy to report that the 2-tier hinge mechanism here is quite nice. There is a slight bit of wobbling, but overall it's sturdy, it's designed to last for the years to come, and should be pretty durable. As far as the display fitting goes, you'll notice you have a relatively thin chin over here, fairly thin bezels, not as thin as the ones on the Xperia series, but again more or less in line with 2021 standards. On the very top side is where you'll find the 720p 30fps webcam. Now I'll be honest with you guys, this is a pretty terrible webcam. It's okay during bright light day settings, but as soon as you go in low light settings, it just looks bad. The display on this machine is actually very much respectable. So you have a 16-inch screen over here with a IPS panel. Also, the resolution over here is 3072 by 1920 or 3K if you will. And yes, it's a 16 by 10 aspect ratio, which is very much loved by all of us. It's also worth noting that while this does have gaming capabilities, the refresh rate unfortunately is locked at 60 Hz. With that said, an amazing thing about this machine is its high degree of color accuracy. With a 100% sRGB rating, the 16 Plus delivers some colorful, vivid, and lively colors. It's great for creative users and should definitely be added to your list of considerations when looking for a high quality laptop. Unfortunately, one of the biggest bottlenecks on this display is that rather limited 300 nits peak brightness. While this is fine for most indoor settings, the minute you use this in a very bright setting, you'll often find that the glare overcomes the screen quite easily and makes for a less than ideal experience. From a performance perspective, your mileage is going to vary depending on the configuration you opted for, but regardless of which one you got, at the bare minimum, day-to-day tasks like web browsing, typing up a Word document, or maybe watching some occasional Netflix is gonna be a total breeze. This machine can handle like a champ no matter which configuration you have. With that said, when you start doing more resource-intensive activities like 4K video editing, for example, I found that while it's a relatively smooth experience, I did run into the occasional frame drops. In fact, these were definitely noticeable, and this wasn't because the hardware wasn't capable, it's simply because the machine runs into a fair bit of thermal throttling, which results in performance drops. This trend carries over into the gaming world. Most games that I ran, modern day games, were able to run anywhere from medium to ultra high settings at a steady 60 plus frames per second. But every now and then I would get dramatic frame drops. Again, that's simply because this device is generating more heat than it can exhaust at a given time every now and then. This naturally brings us to our next chapter, thermals. As you may have guessed, the Dell Inspiron 16 Plus's thin form factor and powerful hardware often make a bit of a disaster for heat dissipation. So at its absolute peak load, I was able to hit surface temperatures of all the way up to 46 degrees Celsius, which is relatively close to uncomfortably hot. Now, a more realistic sustained high load will net you about 38 degrees Celsius, so a little bit better, and under idle loads you can go as little as 21 degrees Celsius. With that said, this machine does have a dual fan setup, which of course is a good thing, but fan noise can go all the way up to 54 decibels, at least in my tests anyway. The good news over here is that when you are doing a light task, the fan hardly ever goes on, and it's a relatively quiet device in that state. In the battery life department, I found at low to moderately intensive tasks, at 50% brightness approximately, I was able to get right around 9.5 hours. Don't get me wrong, this is nothing to write home about, but compared to some of the other offerings in the Inspiron series, this is actually dramatically better. For example, the Inspiron 14 only gets about 7 hours on a single charge. This brings us to our final department, sound quality. Don't get me wrong, for a 16-inch device, the Inspiron 16 Plus can get plenty of loud. I mean, its volume levels are appropriately placed for a device of this size, but it's the clarity department and distortion levels where it really takes a hit. As soon as you go above 65% volume, you start noticing a fair bit of distortion, and go above 80%, it just becomes a bad listening experience. Overall, despite being a stereo speaker setup, this is a relatively mediocre experience. Have a quick listen for yourself.
So enigmatic and charismatic, gotta live static, gotta get at it, never pragmatic, cause we live tragic. I can't live average, to be alive's magic. Turn it up in the back cause I'm grabbing everything I want, get in my way and I'm stabbing. I'll be moving crowds till I'm 6 feet napping. They need another fix, hooked on like an addict.
So here's the summary, guys. Starting at $800 USD and going all the way up to $1,800, this machine comes in all sorts of flavors of configurations. You can change the CPU, you can upgrade the GPU, and of course the RAM all the way up to 32 gigabytes. With that said, some standards include the fact that you get a great overall build quality no matter which configuration you go with. The 3K display is also standard and it looks super crisp and high quality, except for the low brightness levels. Beyond that, you also get a fantastic keyboard, which I wholeheartedly endorse. Some of the things holding this device back, unfortunately, include its performance. While this is a very capable piece of hardware, the heat dissipation factor definitely takes away from the overall immersion of this being a high-end machine and can sometimes create the occasional performance drop when doing tasks like video editing or gaming. With that said though, I still think the Inspiron 16 Plus is a great value, especially in its midline configuration with the RTX 3050 and the i7 processor. Overall, if you are someone who's looking for a productivity powerhouse and you like to do a moderate amount of gaming, this laptop can definitely suffice. But if you are someone who's just focused on the productivity element, there are plenty of devices that do cost less and offer a similar experience. And if you're going into full-time gaming, again, same logic, there are plenty of dedicated gaming laptops that don't suffer from the same thermal throttling issues you find on this device. As always, if you guys enjoyed this review, hit that like button, sub to my channel. It genuinely helps me grow and means the world to me. Catch you in the next one. See ya.